All right, we'll go ahead and call our very first budget workshop meeting to order. I'd like to recognize the absence of Commissioner Hersom and Commissioner Coleman. Commissioner Coleman is dealing with some rainfall issues, and Commissioner Hersom, of course, is out of town, as was already pre-planned. We have Commissioner Farnsworth joining us now. Perfect timing, as always. And Mr. Manager, it's your workshop. Take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you mentioned, this is our kickoff workshop for the fiscal year 2019-2020. Dallas is just going to shorten that and refer to it as fiscal year 2020 for most of the budget season. We have 4 workshops planned. The first one is kind of a kickoff where we kind of do a very high-level overview of the process and kind of give you some background information. The next one will happen in July, and it'll cover governmental funds, general fund. Then the third one will cover our, don't tell me, enterprise funds, but there is proprietary funds. I'm still working on that. Proprietary funds, mostly enterprise funds like our utilities. And then the last one is typically just a wrap-up where we finalize and confirm the feedback we've received from the Commission. Where we start today is a culmination so far of 5.5 months worth of work. Started back in January with staff beginning to compile information and work on our CIP. And we've taken all that information through the months and began to compile it. We've met with elected officials to get their insights, and so this is first public workshop to discuss, and with a couple more yet to come. And I would point out, I guess we'll just start straight into the presentation. We'll go over budget timeline and process.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Commissioners. As the manager just mentioned, we started the budget back in January with all the departments meeting to go over the budget process. Capital improvement plans, personnel and operating budgets have been submitted up through May. We just received our preliminary tax values a few weeks ago, and obviously we're here with our first workshop. The next big things that are coming down the line for the Commission in terms of budget is on the July 8th, the Commission will be voting on the preliminary fire assessment rate. As you'll see in this budget presentation, we're not proposing any adjustment to our fire assessment this year. We're keeping the rate the same, but that will be a vote for the Commission on the 8th. And then the 10th, we have our second budget workshop. So those are the next kind of big steps coming down for the budget. As always, our budget, went too far. As always, our budget guidelines and policies. We strive to maintain 2.5 months of operating revenue as reserves in all of our major funds, which include your general fund, your electric, water, wastewater funds. In the general fund this year, that's $1.4 million, and I'm happy to report that as of the end of the last fiscal year, September 30th, 2018, we had $1.6 million in general fund reserves. So we do have enough money to meet that operating emergency fund.
To the July 10th second budget workshop, Commissioner Hersom and myself will not be there. He's also missing this one. So if anyone else is out, I would propose perhaps shifting it a day, July 10. If you plan on being there. Okay, then we'll leave it on the 10th.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
All right, and you can get back to your good news.
Expand on emergency versus excess.
Okay. When we talk about our operating reserves, the 1.4 that we keep for emergency reserves is the money that we have set aside for a hurricane, for a natural disaster. We just received payment for Irma, which, as the Commission remembers, was almost 2 years ago that we started receiving those funds. especially given the light of what has happened in the Panhandle with Hurricane Michael. Some of those cities are going to go essentially bankrupt because they don't have enough money to pay for debris removal and those operating expenses that come in a hurricane, even with sufficient reserves. So we've set aside that money in case of an emergency, in case something catastrophic happens to the city. The money above and beyond that is reserve money that exists for future projects. The commission can assign that money to a future project and utilize that money for one-time capital expenses. That $200,000 is really there for the future purchases that the commission desires. The 1.4 is, for lack of a better term, I mean, it's pretty restricted. Obviously, the commission can spend it how it pleases, but that's the money we've set aside for.
And Dallas, how many years did it take us to get to that point? Because this has been a goal for ever since I got up here,
I want
which
to
was
say
8 years ago. So
I was going to say at least as long as I've been here. And
yeah.
this will be my 7th year as finance director. So I think when I became finance director, we had $64 in general fund reserves. So
yeah,
made some good progress.
Well done.
Continuing on, one-time revenues will be utilized for one-time expenditures or placed into the reserves. We don't anticipate any one-time revenues this year, but if they come, that's our policy. Obviously, we will present a balanced budget to you as required by state statute. Our enterprise funds will establish fair and equitable operating charges sufficient to meet the operating expenses. That's really true of all of our funds, including our general fund. We establish tax rates that are fair and equitable to the best of our ability to meet the operating expenses. We determine the expenses that meet the goals and strategic vision of the commission. We present that budget to you with the revenue that's needed to meet those goals. We'll develop a diversified and stable revenue system. As the manager will speak to in a couple minutes, we've made a lot of strides in diversifying our revenues over the last couple of years and really shifted from being so dependent on ad valorem taxes. And then we always include inflationary factors and changes in population when preparing our budget. If we continue a continuation budget at the same dollar amount without including obviously the inflation price as well as the increase of our population, it's actually a decrease in service to our customers. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later as well.
And Dallas is always gracious and allows me to speak to the accomplishment that the city has realized. And I think at the top of, the deserving credit for accomplishment is the board that sets our policy and our objectives each year, which is mostly by way of a budget. But one of our significant accomplishments as a city is that we have increased our general fund reserves to $1.6 million. We've exceeded the threshold for emergency reserves, and now we feel like that we treat it as we have $200,000 in savings for whatever type of project the commission envisions coming out of general fund. We've diversified our revenues through a number of sources, again, based on direction from the City Commission, and we continue to look for those opportunities as they come. We'll share a few revenue diversifying opportunities for consideration in today's workshop. We've increased funding for public safety, both in police protection, fire protection, and building department. We've increased funding for repair and replacement of our assets, which has always been a hallmark of this commission, is that insistence that they want to make sure that our infrastructure is being properly maintained and that we, I guess in essence, we leave it better than we found it. And then expansion of infrastructure is something that helps promote economic development, and the commission, I'll remind the commission that a year or so ago, they took a bold step and voted to expand water infrastructure down State Road 26, and we have plans to do the same with wastewater infrastructure. We've worked hard on developing competitive rates. Once upon a time, we were losing a considerable amount of money in our water and wastewater areas, and we also had some equitability issues where folks in a lower socioeconomic stratus were paying a higher percentage. We've made those adjustments. Our electric rates remain very competitive. We've Our solid waste rates, we saw nearly a 25% decrease 2 or 3 years ago at the direction of the City Commission to go bid those services. Law enforcement services, we opted to contract for law enforcement services and get out of the MSTU. That's currently saving the community, the city of Newberry, about $750,000 a year. That should be the biggest feather in your caps that under your direction, we're saving that kind of money of our residents. That's $200 a year that our residents are keeping in their pockets. And since the inception of this contract, which is now 3 years, we've saved our residents $2.5 million. Quantifiable, we can show you exactly how much money they saved. That's really a huge accomplishment. Things that, as we go through the budget process, we'll be asking for feedback and the commission to consider for decision-making purposes are, do we want to explore other types of revenue diversification? We'll outline a few shortly, and we can get some feedback on whether they're worth pursuing in the commission's opinion. I don't think there's anything new on the list. If you've been sitting through these workshops for a year or two, you're going to be familiar with the concepts that we're offering to you. As always, the commission gets to consider what our millage rate would be. You can see the strike through there. Last year, we were very concerned about what homestead exemption amendment might have in the way of our revenues. But if the referendum to consider that failed, and so you won't see that after tonight. We're no longer concerned about that. There will be decision making about how we're going to proceed with law enforcement and expenses related to law enforcement. Personnel, it's the same things. We do not propose any additional staffing this year, but every year we have considerations for increases in personnel expenses related to raises, whether merit increases or cost of living adjustments. We spend a lot of time, and this is kind of the biggest area that the commission gets to weigh in on what we do. They always ask us to have a continuation budget, which is essentially fund the level of service that you're currently providing, which we will do, and then capital improvement program are generally above and beyond that. Which projects would you like to see us undertake? This is how much they're going to cost, and this is the rate impact to either our ratepayers if they're utility related, or to our taxpayers if they're related to the governmental funds. We'll go through in our third workshop. We'll talk about utility rate adjustments. Our past policy, the direction given by the commission is that we do a CPI rate adjustment for water and wastewater rates. That CPI is set by the Public Service Commission. They publish it every spring. It is just north of 2% this year. In the past, we've taken the full measure. We've always said if we can go less than that, we would. But the commission has asked us not to just let it get away from us where we have to make a big jump in 1 year. So we're going to come in and propose the smallest rate increase that we think we can get away with, but it certainly wouldn't be more than 2.3%. And we did a check on where our revenues are running. As you know, we've been losing money on both water and wastewater in small amounts for the last few years since we went to our new rate structure. Right now, we seem to be about breaking even, which is, of course, our objective. We'll have more for that when we get to the next workshop. We will not be proposing increases in electric rates or solid waste rates. The commission made an adjustment in both last year. In solid waste, we had been losing money, and it looks like that the commission's adjustment last year cured that. We are at break even with solid waste, and we are proposing no change in fire assessment. Just a graph to kind of demonstrate what's happening population-wise. This is a trend over the last 5 years. Just noteworthy that from 2017 to 2018, we've realized about a 6% increase in population. With more residents, we anticipate that there's going to be a bigger expense to us to provide the same level of service. Generally, we wouldn't anticipate a 6% increase in population will result in a 6% increase in expenses, but we do recognize that population plays, an increase in population or decrease in population does play a role in a continuation budget. And you'll hear a lot about a continuation budget. In our mindset, we see the continuation budget as we provide the same level of service, and the cost would be the same with consideration given to price indexing. If a gallon of gas costs more or a load of lime rock costs more, those normal price index increases, we don't propose an increase exactly to match that, but we consider that we might need additional funding because of price indexes or because of increases in population. So Newberry, as you all know, has had a very healthy growth rate. We've seen 1,100 new people out of 5,000. That's about a 20% increase in the last 5 years, and it's something we're all aware of. A lot of people want to be in our community. Any questions about those trends or our accomplishments or the policies that we utilize to guide us to get to this point and develop our budget?
Commission have any questions? Nope. Continue on.
We'll move through revenues then.
Moving on to revenue, starting with millage. Obviously, the millage rate and the property taxes the commission levies is one of the biggest levers of funding sources the commission has. This year's preliminary taxable value is $432 million, which is a 2.2% increase from last year. Our Save Our Homes cap, which I'll discuss in a little bit, is 1.9%. Our preliminary rolled back rate is 5.8613. We expect all of those numbers to change. The tax collector has, or the property appraiser has until July 1st to certify the real numbers for our budget, and conversations with the property appraiser indicate that those numbers will go up. So we'll be looking better than we are. But our rollback rate is 5.86 from our current rate of 5.99. And then just for the commission's knowledge, the average taxable value of a home in Newberry is currently $90,000, which equates to about $540 annually resident pays in city taxes.
Mike, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah. Yes, Mr. Mayor, it's just that last table reflects what, as we talk about potential millage increases or decreases, that kind of gives you a perspective on what we would realize in increase or decrease revenue for each mill and what the effect would be on an average homeowner. So if someone says, hey Mike, what if we raised our millage rate or decreased it by 1/10 of a mill? Well, it would change our revenue stream by $44,000, and it would impact the average homeowner by $9. It's good benchmarking information.
Commissioner Farnsworth?
Now that average of $539.91, that doesn't include the fire assessment fee, does it?
Moving along. This is just a graph that shows for every dollar of property tax a resident pays on their tax bill, how the money is divvied up. As you can see, the majority of it goes to Alachua County and the school board, and the city of Newberry receives about 1/4 of every dollar of property taxes paid. We're talking about Save Our Homes. I know there's a lot of confusion out there, so we just wanted to do our best to educate to the best of our ability. It's a very complicated proposal, constitutional amendment that was approved in 1995. The Save Our Homes was initiated as a way to help people not be taxed out of their homes. If you bought a house worth $100,000 in 10 or 15 years, if your community experienced a lot of growth and increase in values, your house could have increased to double or triple that value. And your taxes obviously are based upon that, and you can't afford those taxes because you bought a house that you could afford, and now your house is worth something that you can't afford. So the Save Our Homes was proposed as a way to curb the impact of increase in value on your taxes. So the limit is set annually, and it's either 3% or the CPI, whichever is lower, and it adjusts your assessed value for your tax purposes. It doesn't include improvements made to your property, so if you add a room addition or you add a pool, that new value is added on top of your assessed value outside of the Save Our Homes, but then the Save Our Homes takes place next year. So essentially what the Save Our Homes does is limits how much increase you can see in your taxes just based on your value. Obviously, changes to your millage rate will still affect how much taxes you pay, but your increase in your value will drastically change. So currently Newberry has about $33.7 million of Save Our Homes deferred taxable value, which is $33 million that we're not taxing. That's being kept off the books by Save Our Homes, which equals $200,000 a year in unrealized tax values to the city. And then the table at the bottom just kind of gives you an example of if you have a $150,000 house and there's a 3% Save Our Homes every year, in 3 years, even though your house may have appreciated by $20,000, you're only paying taxes on an increased value of $9,000, and you're saving that $65 a year on that increased value.
An interesting perspective, and I think it is one that, you know, it's not one to live and die by, but it is a perspective, is that $200,000 in unrealized revenue, if we always set our millage rate to meet our expenses, would essentially equate to about $500,000 in reduction. If there wasn't a Save Our Homes, our tax rate would probably look like about $500,000 less than it does today.
This histogram shows the distribution of our taxable values of our residences. As you can see, the vast majority of the taxable values of the city of Newberry are below $100,000. We have about 1,300 of our 2,000 homes are below $100,000 in taxable value, and then much lower amounts above that in varying categories. This is our taxable property values by year in the aggregate. So as you can see, we've been having a steady increase. There are a couple years where we had some dips. For the last few years, we have been seeing a very healthy, steady increase in our taxable property values. And then, as always, we like to give you the millage rate comparison of ourselves and the other communities in this, Alachua County. As you can see, we're solidly in the middle. There's between us and Micanopy, which is the lowest, there's not a lot of a difference, about $1.5 million, and then there's a pretty healthy difference between us and the next highest and the highest cities in the county.
I would just note that nearly everything in the government it's hard to get a full picture. So what this graph doesn't show is like Gainesville, for example, which has a pretty low millage rate. They have they have a stormwater assessment that you don't see in here. So does the county. Gainesville also has a very healthy utility transfer coming into general government that effectively would it does increase the cost of residents, just doesn't show up into this table. So we will, before we get through with our budget workshops, we were preparing a slide that kind of shows everything that government charges, from utility rates to stormwater and fire assessments to property taxes, the best we can for the average residential property on probably a monthly basis, to give you an idea, based on our evaluation of utility rates and millage rates. We suspect we are the lowest cost, at least full service. I mean, you can be a Micanopy or La Crosse that doesn't offer services such as utilities, but in terms of the cities that offer the full level of service, water, sewer, fire, and police protection, we suspect that we're probably the best value in Alachua County.
Moving into these next couple of graphs, the last several years, we've talked a lot about property taxes in these workshops. So this year we wanted to talk about a couple of the other major revenue sources we have, at least in the general fund, to make sure we talk about the full picture that's available to the commission. So this first one is our communication service tax. That is a tax levied by the commission, collected by the state, that is related to phones. As you can see, it's been kind of unstable and unpredictable the last few years and trending downward with an increase in the last year. A lot of that has to do with people not having landline phones anymore. Most people have cell phones. We don't collect communication service tax on cell phones. One of the other issues is this is collected at a countywide level. Part of it has to do with how many are actually in Newberry, and I know the city clerk and the planning department have been working tirelessly with the state to tell the state what properties are in the city, but part of it is a countywide collected tax, and part of the issue we as Alachua County have is the high number of students in the area who might have phone numbers or cell phone numbers that might have a small portion of communication service tax, but they aren't registered in Alachua County. So they might have some bill that goes to another county where that county gets to collect the communication service tax. But like I said, we did see an increase in 2018. We predict that it will be either flat or declining this year, as it has been most years. Your public service tax is a tax that the commission has levied on electric sales as well as LP and propane gas sales within the city. Again, as you can see, it's pretty erratic. It has been steadily increasing the last few years. 2015 was an anomaly, as the commission will remember. The commission ordered an audit on one of our electric service providers that uncovered that they had been underpaying us quite substantially, and so they made a restitution, if you will, payment to us in 2015. That's why that is such a large increase. But we have been seeing steady growth or flat growth in our public service tax year over year as well. Half-cent sales tax, that is our portion of sales taxes in Alachua County that is levied by the state, and they provide half-cent sales tax to local governments for general purposes of operating. As you can see, during the recession, it was flat or declining every year, and then every year since 2012, it's been steadily increasing. That has a lot to do with tourism in the county. It's interesting. We get our sales tax 2 months after the event has happened. So let's say you buy something in October. In November, the person you bought it from sends the sales tax to the state, and then in December, the state sends us the money. We can actually track through the year Gator football games, because when Gator football starts, we start getting more money because there's more sales. We saw decreases in our income during the hurricanes because the hurricanes canceled Gator football games, and we saw a dip in our revenue. But that's primarily where that's driven from is sales within the county.
So Dallas, basically what you're telling me is that when FSU comes to play the Gators here this year and loses spectacularly, that 2 months after that game, we can expect a pretty big check?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I'll look forward to that.
We have a shopping spree every February based on that.
Based on, yeah. In fairness, it's been a kind of a dry shopping spree the last 7 years.
Just don't go to Tallahassee to watch the games. And then our last one is one of always a fun topic is our electric fund transfers over the last few years. This goes back a couple years just to show the volatility that existed in the electric fund transfers for quite some time. In 2012, you can see it spiked. That was one of the years that Florida Rock Vulcan appealed their taxes in the middle of the year, and we had to give a large portion of our tax revenue back to Vulcan. So we kind of forced in that year to do a large transfer. In 2014, the commission had decided that it was an appropriate thing for the general fund to pay the electric fund back. So in 2014, we actually had no transfer. And in 2015, the general fund transferred $195,000 back into the electric fund to try and make up for some of the transfers that had happened in previous years. And then as you can see, since 2016, the transfer has been fairly flat. It's a set percentage now. It's been a set percentage since 2016, and it will continue to be. So we're definitely flattening out that trend.
That's 5%?
Yes, sir, 5%.
And then I guess the final slide in the revenue section of the presentation has to do with opportunities to diversify our revenue streams or or options for just additional revenues. The state of Florida allows for us to tax water sales up to 10%. I think we can go above beyond that, but we have to have an analysis to demonstrate why we do it. So most cities that use a utility tax on water sales tax at 10%. It's similar to any other tax. It's just a way of diversifying a revenue stream for cities. Staff doesn't judge that that's good or bad, just wants the commission to be aware that that it's a tool that's available. Each percentage of the tax would generate $6,300 in annual revenue to the general fund. So if you took the full 10%, it'd be about a $63,000 increase to the general fund. In the past, when the commission has asked us to look at revenue diversification, they've typically asked us to develop a corresponding decrease in millage rate, because the idea is to diversify revenues, not increase revenues. So just point that out. We've also looked at natural gas franchise fees and electric franchise fees. We've checked those off as we put those in place, although we currently don't have a natural gas customer in Newberry. We are working real hard with GRU to do that. They've included in their fiscal year 20 CIP funding to do a gas main extension. At least the first phase of gas main extension will be coming out of Jonesville, and they're trying to get somewhere to about where Canterbury is, Newberry Oaks, and then they'll work on the next phase. They have objectives of potentially serving Florida Rock or Argos, the asphalt plant that Watson owns, our restaurants, Ag Tech Park, those types of things. They've been spending, I guess, the last 3 or 4 months doing some pretty significant load analysis about where all our existing LP gas users are, and they're trying to determine how much of that they might be able to pick up, and they want to be very strategic with their extensions. They ultimately have a goal to extend past us and connect with one of the natural gas pipelines to the west of us. There's the new one that was built called Sable Trails that you remember came through a couple years ago. Very expensive to connect to that one. The connection fees are expensive. They can extend another 10 miles or so and connect to an older one. It's less expensive to connect to, that's Florida Gas Transmission Pipeline. So there are some things happening in natural gas. We're not seeing GRU crews working in here yet, or FPUC crews, because we have franchise agreements with both, but there are some things in the work there. And then at the commission's request, we pulled together some information about special assessments. I think this request was a couple years ago about what are the other areas that we could utilize special assessments. You currently use one for fire protection, but it's within your umbrella of responsibilities or areas that you can impact. You could use them also for utilities, streets, roads, downtown redevelopment, parks. So you have a pretty broad spectrum of areas that you could utilize special assessments.
But Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, special assessments take some time to develop, so these aren't necessarily diversification options that are available to the commission for this upcoming year. Or am I incorrect about that? If we wanted to do it, we'd have to do the study to justify it. It would be something that would go into the next year.
One of the hallmarks of a special assessment is there has to be a nexus for how the fees were calculated. So, with a fire assessment, we contract with GSG, Government Services Group out of Tallahassee. They come in, they do the analysis, they help us set up the parameters for the maximum amount that you could collect. They do the studies on fire protection and how much is emergency response and how much is fire protection. So if any assessment that we pursued, special assessment, we'd have to do a similar analysis, and we would utilize a consultant to help us get there.
And Mike, slightly off topic, but I have had a lot of questions lately about the potential of having not necessarily, there have been a couple about a citywide special assessment for street improvements. Generally, the questions I get from residents have to do with sidewalks in their neighborhood or special assessments for just their road. Same process, if a neighborhood wanted to have a special assessment on their neighborhood to put sidewalks in their neighborhood, have to go through the same sort of analysis, or is that just a?
It's, Mr. Mayor, my experience with that is it's not the same analysis. You don't need that same that nexus that you would do for a community-wide. If we were going to do a neighborhood sidewalk assessment, staff would prepare a couple different ways of looking at it. You could say there's 10 properties, here's the cost to do it, and we can divide it equally by 10. Other people will say, well, I've got 50 foot of frontage, and that guy bought 3 lots, and he's got 150 foot of frontage, so we need to do it by the linear foot. It wouldn't take us long to put together. It would probably take us 60 days to get all the alternatives together for the commission to consider, and then the commission could select something, and we could go ahead and move forward with that.
So if a neighborhood wants to do that, we don't have to wait for the budget season. That can happen at any point in time.
That is correct.
Throughout the whole year. Dallas, are you in agreement with the city manager on that?
You can start the process at any time. Special assessments are collected on the tax bill. The commission could direct us to collect them internally through our utility billing system. But typically we collect special assessments on the tax bill, and we would need a budget for that. So if you did it through the tax bill, you wouldn't see revenues until the following year, again, unless the commission wanted to use the utility billing method.
Okay. Proceed.
Mr. Mayor?
Commissioner Farnsworth.
Would that require canvassing the whole neighborhood before anything of that?
I was going to ask that question, but I didn't want to take us too far off. But I'm not sure how. I mean, that's always been what I've told the residents. I mean, how are you going to find out? I know you want it and you'll pay it, but what about the other 300 houses in your neighborhood?
Right.
Who's going to knock on all those doors? Do you have to put it to a referendum, to a vote to do that?
You do not. The commission gets to select the way they'd like to do it. Typically, what you see in the industry is there's some sort of a poll, and commissions decide that they need at least 50 or 60% of the vote to be in favor. Sometimes for public health issues, I've seen, I participated in one where people's wells were going bad, and the county commission considered it, and it turned out only about 50% of the people supported it. Those that didn't had just put in a new well. They'd just spent $4,000 on a well less than a year old, and the quality of their water was fine. But in the end, it was there was such a health concern that the county commission just said we need to impose this on everyone, and they voted to do that. So it depends on the issue. Sidewalks aren't always considered a public health issue, so the commission may say we're going to need a higher threshold of voters. It really comes down to the level of engagement the commission would like to see, the level of support the commission would like to see.
But a poll is much less formal than a vote. So you can send out a poll in the utility bill.
That is correct.
Right. So if Country Way wants a sidewalk, what's the second street that's closest to the elementary school that doesn't have a sidewalk? Whatever that street is. If they wanted a sidewalk there, we could ostensibly send out a poll to just the folks in that neighborhood, and say it would essentially be, I don't know, $20 a year, and we could do it.
Correct.
And then they could say yes, no. Is that digitally now, or do they?
Any way that we choose.
We could do both.
Any
Okay.
way we choose. I'd say the most common that I've seen, which is not really a big monetary impact, is street lighting. Some communities say if you want street lighting, you pay the initial cost for it. The residents say, yeah, we're willing, and it ends up being $3 a month for the next 10 years, and they go for it.
Okay.
The next section that we'll take you through, that kind of concludes the revenue side. We'll go through our expenses. So Dallas will take you through expenses.
Obviously, personnel is one of the largest expenses we have in the city. There were minor increases in the Florida retirement system this year. Those are included. As always, we anticipate increases in our health insurance. Both of those items we view as continuation items. In the proposed budget, we currently have up to 4% merit increases, has been the Commission's direction the last several years. There is no COLA proposed in the proposed budget. As the manager mentioned earlier, there are no new positions proposed. And one of the things we're doing, we do it every year. We look at our pay scales in comparison to our peers and to the people who may poach our employees. This year, we're taking a really hard look at it. The commission first adopted those pay scales 3 or 4 years ago, and we haven't done a formal pay study since then. So this year, we are doing a formal pay study in-house, looking at all of the different positions and making sure that they're compensated fairly for the work that they perform, and making sure that we're competing with the potential entities that might steal our employees or have stolen our employees.
The next category of expenses that we tend to classify things as an operating. So for since fiscal year 2018, we have provided a few level of service increases. Most notably, we put an inmate crew in the parks and grounds maintenance. Over the years prior to that, our level of service increases were in code enforcement. We've increased our level of service in building department, and we had a second inmate crew helping out with streets and roads. So that's been the focus maybe over the last 3 or 4 years in terms of level of service increases. In the continuation budget, we're not proposing any new services. It really wouldn't be appropriate in a continuation budget. We need direction from the City Commission to increase our level of service. But the things that we consider, again, we've already mentioned, are price index increases and consideration for population increases. Need a little bit more money to serve a greater population, and the things that we're purchasing just cost a little bit more money this year than they did last.
Let me stop you right there, Mike. I apologize. We don't have very many members of the public here, but we do have a couple, and I usually try to offer a couple of chances for the public to ask any questions. Would anybody
Absolutely.
in the audience like to ask any questions, make any comments? All right. Then feel free to continue, Mike.
Unanimous consent from the public.
So we're moving on to where? Capital improvement program. As you know, one, capital improvement program or for expenses that are related to assets that the city is either retiring and renewing or expanding. So we classify them in 2 groups: renewal and replacement of existing infrastructure versus expansion and enhancements. We kind of work under the premise that that existing ratepayers that are paying a monthly bill, that a portion of their bill is set aside to fund renewal and replacement. We do that through depreciation funds. So every year, part of our expense budget is a depreciation line item, and I applaud this commission and the city of Newberry for doing that. Most communities, especially communities our size, do not. But city of Newberry has funding available to replace a tired water system that needs replacing, and just in recent years we've replaced a tired SCADA system. Much of the funding for the AMI project is going to come from that depreciation funding. When our fleet is tired, we've gone a period of 8 years without purchasing a new vehicle, and so we had an aging fleet. We funded that through depreciation accounts. So that's how we fund renewal and replacement. It's not just for utility infrastructure. We use the same concepts for road reconstruction and facilities and all of the city's assets. And then expansion and enhancement programs, we typically don't pay for those out of our operating revenues. We typically pay for those through capital fees or debt service, things of that nature. So expansions would be like a road paving program, or that's an enhancement. We have a dirt road and we want to convert it to a paved road. We'd see that as not being necessarily the obligation of our existing taxpayers, but we'd look for new revenue sources to fund that, potentially a special assessment.
And Mike, I think it's worth maybe pausing and thinking, because we have we're going into a sort of a different year this year when it comes to our CIP because of the AMI. I think this upcoming year, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, we're going to be really unveiling the AMI program, which is not just a big project. It's a very complex project and we're on new ground.
Absolutely.
So when we think about our capital improvement program and all the things that we want to do and get done, I just want everybody to kind of keep it in the back of their mind that, you know, a lot of our key personnel are going to be spending an inordinate amount of time this year on AMI, and we want them to focus and make sure they get AMI right, because if it goes well, I think residents really enjoy it and appreciate it. If we mess it up, then the opposite. So, AMI is not artificial,
Automated
metering infrastructure. So very exciting. It's about $1 million project
Million
over
to $1.5 million.
$1.5 million that we've been working on for already 12 to 18 months, somewhere in there. Eventually, this is going to not only benefit internally the city of Newberry and save us a lot of money in our ability to track and monitor and check things, but our residents will actually be able to monitor their usage on an app on their phone. And so if you go on vacation and your water line breaks and you'll get a notification on an app that says you've used 500 gallons of water at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday, and that's not usual for you, and you can contact somebody, have it shut off. And so we anticipate this having huge savings, not only for us, but for our residents as well. So it's very exciting, but there are plenty of examples of cities that have tried this and not done a very good job. I think we've done our due diligence. We've visited a couple of those cities, one that didn't do a very good job, one that did do a very good job. We've interviewed both of them. We've talked to them about what went wrong, what went well. We've worked with FMPA extensively on this. Like I said, we have, it's been 18 months now that we've been talking about it, studying it, working on it. It's about to start happening. But I just want, I know that we all would like to see a lot of the things in the CIP happen, but we have limited staff time. So that one's going to be a big one, just as the Canterbury one was last year, was a big project that took a lot of focus. So just a thought to keep in the back of everybody's mind.
Well, and that's absolutely correct. As we were going through the budget process, we were having those conversations with each department head about keep in mind that we'll be in deployment, and it's not just an all call for key employees. It's almost going to be an all call for all employees in affected departments. So the bidding phase should happen late summer. We'll go into contract negotiations, and sometime in the fall we're going to go into deployment, and that's a 4 to 6 month long process to get deployment and then work the bugs out, maybe an extra couple months. And to your point, we have done a fantastic job to this point of getting it right. The commission a few months ago selected or enabled us, authorized us to work with a consultant to help us. Best money, in my opinion, that we've spent in a long time. The guys that we hired are literally rocket scientists. One of them is a nuclear engineer, PhD nuclear engineer. They have collectively between them several hundred projects that they rolled out, and they are lifesavers. They are coming up with things that we never anticipated. So that's going to be a big project for us. We've done great at this point, but the rollout is really the crucial point. You can do it well up to this point and completely fall on your face. So we're going to be very focused in the fall at trying to make sure we get it right when AMI deployment occurs.
And just one last thought on the CIP. It is certainly possible. Right now our tentative schedule is to have our law enforcement workshop at the end of July, and we'll be asking the commission to make a decision about the future of law enforcement in the fall. So it's possible that we're rolling out AMI and potentially creating a Newberry Police Department. I'm not saying that's the way you guys will go, but if that's the way you guys go, that's two really big projects. Both of them we want to make sure we do well. So, all right, that's my keep in the back of your brain thoughts for the night. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you. Now that kind of brings us to this slide. If it looks familiar, it is. We like to start out with these are the things the commission's going to have to be thinking about as we go through the budget process, and then we kind of end with your final take is these are the things as we go through our next 3 workshops and through our budget hearings, adoption hearings. these are the decisions that we anticipate the city commission will be giving us direction on. And
Let's
Yeah,
go back to that commission consideration slide there. Anybody have things that they particularly would like to throw out there for consideration tonight they want to let staff know to think about? Or are we just in a take it in mode tonight, Commissioner Martin?
Revenue diversification, I don't have too much of an appetite for the water tax myself. The millage rate, I'd like to try to see if we can't keep that at the rollback rate. TBA on the law enforcement pending our workshops. Personnel expenses, I think just staying consistent with that. We've kind of been on that track and been able to absorb that healthily. Capital improvement project, I've had sidebars with both Dallas and Mike about, I believe that and public safety is our core missions at the city government level. Fire assessments, I think we just need to look at the CIP on that, because I seem to remember a couple of things in there. We just need to make sure that those are calculated or accounted for. The utility rated adjustments, as best as we can, keep those at the break-even points. To a certain extent, I think that's the only way to really justify the value of the service that we provide. We've talked up here pretty often over the years about creating the value and not necessarily focusing so much on what it costs, but what we're actually providing for the cost. And sometimes there is appetite to increase the rate so long as that value is there. And CPI rate, those adjustments on the surface at least look to be fair. No real earth-shattering news there.
I'll stop and send good wishes to Commissioner Coleman. His house he's trying to build is already flooding. Sounds like that situation may be getting exacerbated. Other thoughts, things you want staff to think about before the next budget workshop? Anyone else? All right. I think the next slide was questions or comments, so.
correct.
Anybody have any final things that they would like to say? We've kind of got an overview, thought about the direction we're going. I know that I have had conversations with most of you guys about roads. I think where we're at now is trying to develop a plan for the roads. I'm not sure what could happen in this budget year, except for maybe some increased rock that's being put down. I think that going forward, we might want to think about now that our roads proposal is effectively dead with the county, I'd like to, bring it to you guys to think, how is Newberry by ourselves going to move forward with our roads? And I think staff has some ideas. Again, I'm not sure necessarily any of those ideas can be instituted in this budget year. I mean, obviously you guys always have the ability to do what you want. But I think the ideas that staff has would take some time to sort of put together. So I'm going to ask them, maybe this fall, once we get through the law enforcement workshops, to present some long-term strategies for road improvement in the city of Newberry. But if there's anything that you guys beyond, the complaints that I get aren't necessarily about the frequency of grading, it's about the amount of rock that we put down. So I think that we can do that without a significant change in the budget right now. But in terms of paving, chip sealing, repaving, those are bigger ticket items that I think we need a long-term strategy for how we go about it. So that's really, roads are about the only thing I've heard anybody say that they are looking for an increase in level of service on, and even that is pretty much just the rock, not necessarily the amount of grade. Commissioner Farnsworth?
Just curious as to what kind of plan are we using to expand the sewer system west of town? Or east of town, not west of town?
East of town.
Yeah.
Well, we have a plan that includes the construction of a force main. It's actually a three-phase plan. So in order to convey sewage back downtown, and the three-phase plan gets sewage services, wastewater services, all the way to 170th. So that's about $10 million by our estimation, and that includes pump stations and force mains. We figure that gravity collection to serve locally, the way that works is you serve businesses and homes by gravity to a pump station, and then the pump station will convey the sewage through a force main back to our wastewater plant. So we've evaluated that, with pump stations and force mains, when development occurs, that's when the gravity sewer would go in with it, with the roads and the water mains and those other things. So phase one would be able to serve the area from about Destiny Community Church back to Canterbury. We've estimated that project, force main and lift station, to be $1.5 million. We've gone to the state legislature, I think 4 years in a row for funding, and 3 years we struck out. We currently, in the proposed budget that is sitting on Governor DeSantis's desk, are earmarked for $500,000 in grant funding. So if we get that, what staff is going to propose is we get started on the project, and we go ahead and take down the planning work, which we have a proposal, I believe it's $120,000, I say planning, design, $120,000 for design, and we anticipate that to be 6 or 7 months. That'll take us right up to next fiscal year for the state legislature. We seek the balance of that in another appropriation. If we're successful, we go into construction because we'll be shovel ready at that point. If we're not successful, we'll ask the commission if they want to proceed and fund it out of any number of creative ways that we can come up with. We could take out some debt to do it. We could fund it from our utility reserves, and that's kind of our plan. There's no development that we're currently aware of that is awaiting on this. We do understand that if you build it, then something would come. We might try to accelerate that program or recommend accelerating that program if somebody says, I'm buying the dirt and the only thing we're lacking is wastewater service, but we don't have any of that right now. And that gets us through phase one. The next phase gets us beyond 202 up to 186th, which is down towards where the pet spa is, and then the third phase would get us down to 170th at the intersection where the what is that tree farm right there on the corner? Yeah, exactly. So it's a three-phase program worth about $10 million, but for now, what's currently on our radar is up to 202 or Destiny Church, and we think it's $1.5 million to get the pump station in, and we think we've secured $500,000 and can get us started on the project as soon as the budget is approved, and that's likely to be this week.
Will the property owners have to repay the city or the state whenever they connect to that?
Not repay. I mean, the city of Newberry has a wastewater capacity fee for wastewater services, so every resident that connects pays about $3,500 per connection. That funding is really earmarked to purchase their capacity at the wastewater treatment plant. If you take the total cost to build a wastewater plant and divide it by the number of homes that connect to it, it works out to be about $3,500 per connection. So that pays the debt service, or it pays for the expansion on the new treatment plant when we need to expand. Rate paying pays for the depreciation and the operating cost to maintain a wastewater plant. So there'd be no cost on top of our normal connection fees if we continue to move down utilization of appropriations and regular reserves to fund the expansion. The commission put together agreements on the water expansion out there where some of the adjacent property owners will reimburse for the base capacity of that pipeline. We could do something similar for wastewater, but then I think that we fear running those costs up too much would then just result in the development we're trying to attract saying it's just too expensive to come there now when you factor all those extra fees. So we're trying to figure a way to do that that doesn't result in an additional assessment to potential development.
The reason I was wondering, because when we did the citywide installation of the sewage system, the homeowners were charged by their footage on their property.
Correct.
And whenever our property down in town in Swanee got connected, they charged us the same way. So I didn't know whether that would be also for those.
The city currently does levy and we call it a capacity charge. Once upon a time, capacity charges were universally determined by lineal foot. It was more driven by the gravity sewer cost going in than the actual cost of the treatment plant. And so they figure if you had 100 foot of frontage versus 50 foot of frontage. I don't see those assessments being done on a linear foot basis any longer. But I think back then probably the average capacity charge was about $1,000 per resident per home. That the cost of construction of wastewater plants is now escalated to the point that that fee is about $3,500 a home. And I don't believe the city of Newberry has changed that fee over the last decade. I don't know when it's not been even considered while I've been working here. And at some point we will have to check it. If the next time we get a loan from the state or a grant from the state, they require us to evaluate that. They don't believe in community welfare. That's how it's thought of. If communities can only expand their wastewater plants because of grants, and that's the only way you get there. I mean, I wouldn't want to speak of any communities just to the south of us, but their only prayer for wastewater system is almost 100% funded by the state. The state is not happy about that, and they're trying to discourage that. They try to make sure that you have revenue streams that are sufficient that you can stand on your own feet. I was on a conference call with DEP yesterday, and DEP readily acknowledged that Newberry had always been one of the best at having the revenue sufficiency to stand on its own and not be that community that was stuck in that impasse and needed a government bailout. So we have those charges, but I think they're appropriate, and we may see them go up in the next few years just because the cost of construction is going up.
Any other questions or comments from the dais?
Thank you.
Okay, does the public have any questions or comments from the dais? Well, Mr. Manager, please pass along our gratitude to the Customer Services Department for starting a new tradition of providing candy at every single budget workshop that we have from here on out. We appreciate that. And hearing no other questions or comments, Dallas, comment, question?
Well, I have conflicting information on the second budget workshop. I know we discussed the budget workshops in a commission meeting. On the calendar, we
July
have
10?
Well, on the calendar, we have it scheduled for July 15th. Does that work for everybody?
I'll be back in the country on
So
July 15th,
we may
so
have
that's better for
originally
me.
scheduled it for July 10th and moved it to the 15th because of those.
I have it in
conflicts.
my calendar as July 15th
What
as
day of the
well,
week?
That's a Monday.
which fits with my memory because I didn't remember missing a budget workshop.
So
we're going to delete the 10th and keep the 15th?
Correct.
Delete
I as well have I have one.
okay.
Okay,
I think it was a bad slide.
so just a misprint, that's probably from last year, right?
Yeah, it's probably last year's date. Yeah.
Okay, good catch, thank you. Any other questions or comments for tonight? Hearing none, we are adjourned.